Welcome to my channel. Let's get at it. Now, the mayoral race in the state of California, or more importantly, in the city of Los Angeles, is they're saying that it's going to take, weeks to count the ballots. Now, networks and the political strategists and the polls are saying that only 23% of Angelenos turned out to vote in this particular election. Now, when that happens, that means, blacks stood down, because a lot of times, a lot of black Americans or African Americans, we separate church and politics. We don't talk about politics, but, we'll show up and show out if we're motivated and galvanized to support a particular candidate, just like we did with Barack Hussein Obama on two different occasions. But when you, in modern times, you got to look at, the situations and scenarios, because now, since Biden, for some strange reason, and this is actual facts, Biden had got the most votes by any political candidate in the history of voting. And that was due to COVID and the mail-in ballots and all of that. So from a strategic perspective, game recognized game. So these particular games are in play when it comes to the ballots, because I saw a particular outlet was saying, we're just 62%, into the counting, and there's 4 million votes to count. And I'm sitting back, if there's 4 million votes to count and there's 23%, meaning you got 4 million ballots to figure out or decipher of who you're going to give them to, because Nithya Raman is the candidate that has to somehow surpass Spencer Pratt, because if it's a runoff between Spencer Pratt and the incumbent Karen Bass, then that's not going to look good at all, because she cannot beat Spencer Pratt in a runoff election. I guarantee that. So this is why, we're seeing, the latest dump of ballots. Nithya Raman has closed the distance between her and Pratt. You're starting to see the setup, because I know I could just think back in recent history and in recent memory. On election day, we got the election, pretty much there was a declared winner, whether it was a mayor, a city council, on the day of. But since, they changed the game, but since they changed the rules, with the, when Biden versus Trump, and somehow we're going to send out all, mail-in ballots to every single household, and somehow we'll go ahead and retrieve those ballots. And then we have 4 million ballots to make a decision. So, it's like I said, it's hard to trust the system, but, when they stop the counting, and then you have to start all over, and, it's going to take days. And that's when, the hanky panky comes in. And like I said, and I was wondering why Bass was so happy, because to my understanding, if you get 50% plus one, then you're declared the victor. You don't even have to have a runoff. And that's the first time, this has happened in recent history, in 21 years. Okay, because when you look at modern Los Angeles mayor reelections, since 1990, Tom Bradley, 89, won his reelection comfortably. Richard Riordan in 1997 won his election comfortably. Okay, Villaraigosa in 2009, Eric Garcetti in 2017. Okay, Karen Bass is the first mayor, or the first incumbent forced into a runoff since James Hahn back in 2005. And he was not a popular candidate, and he actually lost, the runoff. So, this is crazy, but I can see why the Bass campaign was so happy and ecstatic as if they won the election, because she had to be, forced into the runoff, or had to get, to the runoff, so they can actually make the play. Because I'm looking, like I said, I don't want to get ahead of myself, because Spencer Pratt is in second place, but I'm looking at the news and the talking points and everything that they're saying, reminds me, back, in 2020, when it was, Trump versus Biden, and, now, we just got a dump of ballots, and the majority of these votes went to, you see what I'm saying? And that's when it just, It's hard to trust, but the integrity of our votes and understanding their democracy, meaning, they'll do anything, to preserve their democracy. And we're looking at it at play right now because, like I said, Karen Bass, she didn't win, but she didn't lose, but she's the first incumbent, in 21 years to be forced into a runoff election. And that's real. So Karen Bass is the first sitting Los Angeles mayor in 21 years to be forced into a runoff election. The last incumbent mayor in this position was James Hahn back in 2005, and he lost the election. So then when you pop over to the governor's race, and this was basically, I'm trying to find a live count, but I saw an outlet where Xavier Becerra was winning and Tom Steyer was number 2. But then now on this one, on Ballotpedia, Steve Hilton is number 1 at 26.9%. Becerra is number 2 at 25.8%. And Tom Steyer is at distant third with 19.8%. So these things are all over the place. And this one right here, let me see here, updated. Let me see here, last updated at midnight. Okay, so this is a little dated as well. And this one got Steve Hilton in first place at 1.4 million votes at 27%. Becerra, 1.3, 25%. And Tom Steyer, with all that money he spent, he's in third place. So if it's a runoff between Hilton and Becerra, and if it's a runoff between Spencer Pratt and Mayor Bass, then the red wave is in full effect, because a lot of people, we really, don't understand how these things work, but you have to really pay attention and have to look at both sides of the coins, because there's a lot of games going on. But the fact that Steve Hilton at this point, as a GOP candidate, Trump supported by President Trump, and he's leading right now, speaks volumes, because you had other candidates in the race as well. Okay. And that's Chad Bianca, who basically got literally 500,000 votes up into this point on this particular poll or this website, Ballotpedia. Those voters more than likely would flip to Steve Hilton. So this is going to be something, election of the ages, because when you look at, elections, this one here is going to be historical, because if Steve Hilton holds on and is a part of the runoff, and if Spencer Pratt, can hold on, because like I said, I saw an outlet and they basically said that there's 4 million more ballots to count, but then they're saying it's only a 23% turnout. So literally they have 4 million ballots to do. And like I said, I don't want to speculate, but if Steve Hilton is not in the top 2, I'm sure that they're going to challenge it. And like I said, to no avail. And if Spencer Pratt somehow, when they do these ballot dumps, and, you're going to see reporting, breaking news, there's been a ballot dump, and Nithya Raman has surpassed Spencer Pratt and more than likely will be in the runoff against Karen Bass. That's the play. Okay, that's why they're keying together. That's why they're, she's, the strategic individuals behind the scenes, have done what they have done, because that's the scenario for their democracy. And like I said, in the state of California, it's deep dark blue. But the fact that Steve Hilton is in first place, and these are the, votes that they had to count on the day of. So they got enough ballots to just, like I said, when you really want to look at, the voting and want to see scams and want to see cheating, you just look at, Biden versus Trump, because the same thing happened. They sent ballots to everybody's household. Okay. And I don't know too many people who went on record and said that they literally voted for Joe Biden. Most of them said, I ain't vote, because like I said, if blacks, we have a strong conviction, and if we're not motivated to go out and to vote, we'll just literally stand down and let, the ball just drop, let it just play itself out. So they got 4 million ballots to decide, the mayoral runoff. And Karen Bass, in 21 years, the first incumbent in 21 years, did not, win outright, because all she needed was 50 plus 1. So, the people have spoken. Maybe they won't change. Maybe we won't change. Maybe we'll see it. But like I said, I'm really, preserving, my reporting on this, because I got a strange feeling that something strange is going to happen. So I'm going to go ahead and wait until the runoff candidates are actually called. And as of now, Steve Hilton is in first place. Becerra is in a close second, and Tom Steyer is in third. And then the mayoral race, it's Spencer Pratt and Karen Bass. But I saw something, man, and they said we got 4 million ballots to count, and more than likely, it's going to end up going to bridge the gap between Spencer Pratt and Ms. Rahman. So with that being said, man, I'm sorry. My energy's off a little bit today because, like I said, I smell a rat. All right. With that being said, this is your man, Bushan Glover, Better Black America TV. Have a good day. Peace out.